The first thing people noticed wasn't the voice, it was the money. A stack of crisp bills hit the silver tray with such a clean, heavy sound that conversation in the Prestige Club rippled and stopped. Tuesday night in Midtown Manhattan. White tablecloths, ceiling-high windows, murmurs of dealmakers and diplomats. At the center of it all sat Richard Blackwell, a white, self-made millionaire in a pale suit and an even paler smirk. He tilted back in his chair, let his words carry just far enough to be private, and made sure the whole room caught them anyway. "I'll give you $100,000, he said, eyes on the black waitress setting down flutes of champagne. "If you serve me," in Chinese. The tray didn't rattle, but a muscle in her wrist tightened. Her name tag read Jasmine. Her expression read calm. The men at Richard's table, 3 visiting investors from Tokyo, suits sharpened to needles, exchanged glances. One of them smiled sadly at Jasmine, like he'd seen this trick before and hated that he would see it again. Richard's grin broadened, powered by the attention he was getting. "Come on," he coaxed. "Full service. Explain the menu. Make it convincing. If you pull it off, the cash is yours. If not, you apologize for wasting our time." He paused, savoring the tiny shockwave rolling through nearby tables. "Sound fair?" The hook was set, a challenge wrapped like a dare, dipped in cash, barbed with the confidence of a man used to making the world bend. Someone at a corner table lifted their phone, not obviously, just enough that a camera might catch history in the making or cruelty in the moment. The manager on duty hovered behind the host's stand, prayer in his posture. "Don't escalate." Jasmine's hands stayed steady. The room could not see the years behind the stillness. Nights in a hospital chair next to her mother's bed, mornings rehearsing vowel tones between shifts, an academic life paused but not erased. She met Richard's eyes. "Do you want Mandarin or Cantonese?" A few laughs flickered and died. Richard leaned forward. "Surprise me." He tapped the money with one manicured finger. "Just remember, this is a real bet." The investors shifted again. One of them, an older man with thoughtful eyes, cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackwell, perhaps this is a demonstration," Richard interrupted. "Of honesty. Competence. My partners should know I don't reward pretense." The older man looked at Jasmine, apology in the crease between his brows. She bowed her head a fraction, a signal that said I know and also watch. "Very well," Jasmine said. "Let's establish rules." It wasn't the voice of a server asking whether they preferred still or sparkling. It was the voice of a moderator calling a room to order. Full service in Mandarin, including specials and recommendations. "If I succeed, you pay what you promised. If I fail, I will apologize." Her gaze stayed on Richard. "But if I succeed, you will apologize as well, for assuming a stranger's limits." The room registered the counter bet the way a body registers a thunderclap. First the flash, then the sound. Richard's smile paused, then reconstituted itself. "Apologies now?" "Ambitious." He waved the deal closed with 2 fingers. "Let's make it entertaining." Jasmine lifted the leather-bound menu, neither rushed nor theatrical. She could feel the eyes, the tired, the curious, the skeptical, the hungry. She could feel the weight of every time someone had called her sweetheart, or called her overqualified, or called her invisible. She took a breath that tasted like lemon water and polished steel. Then she spoke. It was not the halting mimicry people expected. It was Mandarin that landed on the ear like glass bells, precise tones that curved and fell with a natural confidence, the kind that only comes from long, hard study and living with a language until it becomes family. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome." She flowed into the description of the chef's regional tasting, Sichuan aromatics balanced with Huayan finesse, then into textural contrasts, seasonal provenance, the reason sea cucumber must never be rushed, why the duck needs one more breathing hour after the oven. She didn't race. She served, language like water poured at the right temperature. The older investor straightened in his chair, eyes alive. His colleague's mouth lifted, surprised. The third, who'd been politely wary, leaned in, fascinated. Jasmine knew exactly where the room was, knew exactly where she was taking it. Richard's eyebrows rose in slow disbelief, then irritation. He flicked his gaze toward the investors, searching for doubt, finding dawning respect instead. "Cute," he said too loudly when she paused to let them consider a pairing. "We rehearse a speech, we learn a trick, Jasmine's smile was feather-light. Would you like me to continue in Cantonese? She asked. In Cantonese. Or shall we remain in Mandarin for clarity? Someone choked on a laugh. The manager at the host stand stopped pretending to sort reservation cards. The phone at the corner table, still subtly recording, found its frame. Fine, Richard muttered. Continue. He pinched the bridge of his nose, composure thinning. The hook had become a vice. Jasmine went on, effortlessly, switching registers like a violinist shifting positions. She avoided mockery, avoided triumph. She simply performed. The work, the study, the care. She did what professionals do when given the mic for the wrong reasons. She redeemed the moment by telling the truth. The truth sounded like grammar laws and lilting idioms and 1,000 hours of memorized menus. And something bigger, respect. Respect for cooks and languages and customers. Even customers who laid bets like traps. When she finished the first course description, she lowered the menu and asked, in English, would you like the duck carved tableside? She asked it gently, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if a man hadn't just called the room to watch her fail. The older investor nodded, a subtle bow accompanying the gesture. Please. His voice was low, nearly reverent. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time that evening, he had nothing to say. The second act began with a small sound. The soft click of the manager locking his eyes to Jasmine's and giving the tiniest nod. I'm here. It was enough. She moved through the rest of service with the calm choreography of a conductor. Specials described in Mandarin, substitutions handled in Cantonese, wine notes recommended in unadorned English so that Richard could not later claim he'd been excluded. She invited the investors to ask questions in whichever language felt comfortable. They tested her just enough to satisfy their own doubt, and then not at all. Richard tried to reclaim the narrative. He made a joke about fortune cookies that died on the napkins. He misnamed a province. Jasmine corrected him kindly, without the slightest caustic edge, like an educator addressing a student who'd nearly understood. He attempted to upgrade the challenge. Explain the preparation process for Xiaolong Bao in technical Mandarin. 18 folds, steaming method, gelatin. Tell them like a chef. He had expected to rattle her. Instead, he watched as she summoned each specific verb, each culinary term, each careful measure, laying them down in Mandarin with the sobriety of a lab report and the warmth of a family kitchen. The older investor, eyes bright, whispered something to his colleague, who nodded. A decision was moving through their table like current. Jasmine did not hide behind language alone. When she sensed tension hardening in the room, servers holding their breath, diners trapped between wanting justice and fearing a scene, she shifted her service to include people beyond Richard's table. She refilled water at a family's booth and told their young daughter how to say thank you in Mandarin and enjoy in Cantonese. She checked on an older couple with mobility concerns and reassured them their soup would be ladled for them tableside. She acted like the moral center because she was the moral center. The room calibrated to her. Richard, feeling control slip in increments, grew sharper. Let's be real, he told the investors, chuckling like a man disarming a bomb with charm. Anyone can memorize lines. It's performance. What matters in business is authenticity. He hit that word too hard, like tapping a cracked glass to prove it was fine. The investors said nothing. They'd already seen something real and were unwilling to pretend they hadn't. So Richard tried a final pivot, the oldest one. He made it personal. Tell us about yourself, he said to Jasmine, his tone smoothing for show. Where'd you learn all this? He curled his fingers in the air as if quotation marks could shrink her. Jasmine had kept her past folded, not as a secret, but as a boundary. She'd been pushed. The boundary could widen. I studied linguistics, she answered, simply. A lot of Mandarin. Some Cantonese. Other languages, too. She did not list degrees. She did not brandish titles. She did not humiliate him with a resume. The investors, however, invited her to go on. Where? The older one asked, not testing, just wanting to give her the floor. Columbia, she said. Doctorate in computational linguistics. My research included Mandarin dialectology and culinary lexicons. The words spread through the room, not boastful, just informative, like weather moving in. Richard laughed a fraction too loudly. So a PhD, he said. And now you're here? He gestured at the tray, the tables, the evidence of what he presumed was permanent demotion. Jasmine let the silence answer for a second. Then she filled it without bitterness. Life reroutes us, she said. My mother had a medical crisis. I took care of her. I needed income one could count every week. So I serve. I learn. I keep showing up. Her gaze did not flinch. Respectfully, that doesn't make me less. The sentence held a paradox, gentleness that felt like steel. The older investor placed his chopsticks down. I appreciate your work, he said. And your clarity. The other two murmured agreement. Richard saw the balance shift and panicked. He reached for the money on the tray as if the bet were a toy he could snatch back before anyone noticed. The manager stepped forward. Sir, he said, voice professional but lined with granite. The money is part of a verbal contract witnessed by this room. Richard withdrew his hand, scowling. He swallowed the impulse to escalate. Phones were out. Faces were watching. His public image depended on controlling stories. Suddenly the story was controlling him. Jasmine concluded service not with a victory lap, but with a sincere check-in. Is there anything you need that I haven't provided yet? She asked, in English, and then in Mandarin for the investors, and finally in a soft Cantonese addendum. She gave Richard the same gift she gave every guest, a chance to be cared for. He couldn't take the gift. His pride wouldn't let him. We're done, he said tightly. Bring the bill. The investors exchanged looks, not the conspiratorial kind, the consequential kind. Jasmine inclined her head and went to print the receipt, her pulse steady, her eyes briefly closing as if to say a very simple prayer. Let dignity be enough. After the plates were cleared and the duck bones were carted away, the restaurant's energy loosened enough for people to remember their own meals. Conversations resumed, quieter, more careful. The story would be told later. For now, it hummed under the surface like a hidden bass line. At the server station, Jasmine's co-worker Maya grabbed her forearm. Girl, she whispered, delighted, awe dancing in her voice. That was a TED Talk with chopsticks. Jasmine laughed softly, tension breaking like a thin layer of ice. I just did my job, she said. Maya squeezed her hand. You did more than that. She glanced toward Richard's table. Be careful. He's the type who retaliates. Retaliation had been a teacher in Jasmine's life. Not the loud kind, the bureaucratic kind. The hospital insurance letters with denied stamped not in red, but in a font so neutral it felt like indifference made physical. The email from her department chair, we understand your circumstances. Unfortunately, the sabbatical cannot be extended, signed with warmth that evaporated as soon as she realized it was the end of her position. The friend who'd meant to call. The award she'd been nominated for, which never materialized into anything but a line on a CV in a drawer. Jasmine had learned not to turn bitterness into a home. She'd learned to pack it like a stone in her pocket and walk forward anyway. That forward motion had names. One of them was Professor Anand, the mentor who'd looked past the myth of the pure academic path and said, there will be seasons when grace looks like grocery money. He'd slipped her extra research shifts when her mother first got sick. He'd connected her with a visiting professorship in Beijing for 6 months that turned into a laboratory for her thesis on culinary terminology and cultural memory. In Beijing, she'd lived small and studied large. Her days a circle of market stalls, quiet apartments, stern professors who slowly softened when they realized she wasn't there to collect phrases like souvenirs. She was there to understand. Those months gave her a language bigger than words. Respect, again and again. Back in the present, respect was about to be tested. The manager approached Richard's table with the sealed check presenter. The investors were ready, cards out, pens poised. Richard declined the leather folder with a crisp flick. I'll pay my portion, he said, slicing the air around the pronoun. But the sideshow? I don't pay for stunts. He nodded at the cash still sitting on the server tray as if it were a stray napkin. The manager inhaled slowly. Sir, you publicly offered $100,000 for a service performed in good faith. Multiple witnesses to a joke, Richard cut in. Whims are not contracts. She had fun. So did the room. We move on. He stood, reaching for his jacket, hoping movement could substitute for authority. The older investor didn't stand. He placed both hands on the table, clean and still. Mr. Blackwell, he said gently, I was prepared to attribute your bet to poor taste. Refusing to honor it is a different category. It speaks to reliability. The smallest word in the sentence, the last one, landed like a gavel. Reliability. The virtue investors prize more than almost any other. Richard forced a chuckle. Are we seriously debating entertainment etiquette? The investor's colleague set his pen down. We're debating integrity. The third investor, who had said little, added a single sentence. Pay the woman. For a moment, Richard seemed to calibrate. He looked at the cash, at the phones, at the manager, at the investors. He calculated exposure and loss. Then he made the mistake arrogant people make when cornered. He doubled down. This is extortion, he said. And I don't respond to it. He turned his back, the universal signal of dismissal. It was the line you don't cross, not because you'll be punished, but because you reveal yourself. The room saw it. So did a teenager at a nearby table, who stopped pretending to scroll and pointed the phone camera directly now. No subtlety needed. The manager's voice came precise and calm. Sir, if you leave without resolving this, you will be trespassing. Also, our security cameras, and several others, document a verbal offer accepted and fulfilled. The word document did the work of 10 threats. Richard stopped. Something ugly flickered behind his eyes and then receded. He couldn't afford brashness. His empire lived on deals and dinners. He pivoted again, toward charm. Let's not ruin an evening, he said, ordering his smile to appear. He picked up the cash, arranged it as if tidy stacks could repair messy ethics, and counted. 1,000. 2. 10. 50. 100. The counting took time. Time for people to wonder how many times he'd pulled smaller versions of this, on waiters, drivers, junior employees, without cameras watching. Time for Jasmine to watch him without gloating, and for the investors to watch her watch him, and to realize that composure this consistent wasn't a trick, it was character. When the last bill hit the tray, the older investor nodded once. Thank you, he said, to Jasmine, not to Richard. Richard inserted one last needle. A word of advice, he said lightly to her, as if this were a friendly exchange between equals. Don't mistake party tricks for power. This, he gestured at the room, the applause ripening in silence, won't last. Jasmine's answer wasn't sharp, it was honest. Kindness lasts, she said. So does disrespect. Nothing more. Nothing less. She carried the tray to the service station, handed the money to the manager for safekeeping, and went to check the 7:45 seating at table 11, where a nervous couple had ordered the cheapest sparkling water and were trying to look like they belonged. She made them feel like they did WY morning. The video had moved faster than rumor. 15 seconds of audio. I'll give you 100,000. The glide of Jasmine's Mandarin, the soft gasp at the reveal, the quiet finish. Kindness lasts. The clip bounced from a private story to a public feed to a local blogger's roundup to a national account that minted outrage for breakfast. The captions were predictably dramatic. Millionaire tries to humiliate Waitress. Instant karma. The edits slightly unfair, but the core was accurate. Public disrespect, public competence, public consequence. Jasmine didn't watch it on loop. She couldn't. She had to get her mother to physical therapy and then make her noon shift at the clinic before returning to the restaurant for the dinner rush. The investors watched. They also read. Overnight, their analysts sent a concise packet. A pattern of settlements at companies Richard had controlled, 3 lawsuits dismissed on technical grounds, but ugly in their allegations, a PR firm's invoice for reputation stabilization services. None of it proved catastrophic wrongdoing. All of it smelled like smoke near dry timber. At 10 a.m., the older investor sent a text to his partners. Let's pause. We require reliability. At 10:15, the pause became a pivot. They scheduled a different lunch. They invited a different partner, quiet, competent, not flashy. They also requested a meeting with the Prestige Club's general manager. We'd like to discuss a cultural training initiative, the message read, and we'd like Ms. Jasmine to lead it. Compensation competitive. Sometimes the market delivers correction in headlines. Sometimes it delivers it in calendar invites. Richard, meanwhile, launched a familiar counteroffensive, minimization. Blown out of proportion, he told a reporter. Playful challenge between friends, he posted on his feed, using a photo from a charity gala to signal virtue by association. The comment section did not comply. People who'd worked events with him surfaced in polite, damning waves. He talks down to staff. He's generous when watched. He treats tip pools like tips on his power. None of it would hold in court. All of it mattered in the only court that decides whether you get invited to the next deal, reputation. At the Prestige Club, the manager invited Jasmine into his office at 3 p.m. He closed the door, sat, and for a beat looked like a man trying to choose words his heart could carry. "You didn't just handle yourself," he said. "You elevated us." He slid a plain envelope across the desk. "This is a bonus. An HR will process your bet money formally, so taxes are right." Also, he exhaled a small laugh of disbelief. "Two of last night's guests asked whether you consult. The one with the glasses, he's serious." He said the words director and global and intercultural. Jasmine listened as if he were telling a fairy tale, and she was too old to trust the ending. She thought of her mother's pills, the rent, the zero in her savings account. She thought of a life derailed and maybe not destroyed. That night, Jasmine's section filled with regulars and strangers looking for a story's scent. She didn't dramatize. She served. She corrected a child's chopstick grip gently. She traded a wine she didn't love for one she trusted. She said please and thank you like a person, not a script. At 8:30, the older investor returned, alone. He requested a simple bowl of congee and tea. When Jasmine arrived, he stood, bowed. "May I speak plainly?" he asked. "Please," she said. "You displayed language mastery and moral clarity under pressure," he said. "My firm builds bridges between markets and cultures. We need a leader for that. Would you consider, after you sleep and breathe, a role?" He laid out terms: salary that erased debt, resources to build a team, time to sit with her mother in daylight. Jasmine didn't cry. She felt something steady settle in her chest. A future. Richard watched the second wave, a quiet correction of invitations. The museum committee he'd chaired suggested a rotation. The hotel group he'd been courting asked for additional references. His PR firm sent a bill that made him flinch. He blamed the internet. He blamed this sensitivity era. He did not blame the moment he tossed money like bait in a room full of people who were not props. The next week, a board he sat on called a closed meeting. It ended with a "thank you for your service" that sounded like a door closing softly, but for good. Instant karma isn't a lightning bolt. It's a mirror held up in public, and then 1,000 small choices adjusted in private. The mirror had been held. Choices began to shift. 6 months later, a glass door slid open on the 44th floor of a midtown tower, and a different nameplate caught the morning light. Director, Intercultural Relations, Jasmine Williams. She arrived early, not out of fear, but habit, and stood a moment at the window. The city moved like a living diagram of ambition and survival. She could see the restaurant from here if she squinted and knew where to look. She could see the hospital where her mother now had a therapist who knew her name and not just her chart. She could see the old apartment she'd shared with 3 people who had cheered her on like family when the job offer came through. Her office was not a throne, it was a workshop. The first program she built wasn't a flashy language series. It was a respect curriculum for executives who thought global meant translation. She brought in chefs to talk about how menus carry memory. She invited drivers, concierges, junior staff to speak candidly, paid, protected, about the micro-humiliations of daily business and the small acts of dignity that change outcomes. She trained her team to measure not just growth, but trust. The investors who'd hired her gave her room. When they didn't understand, they asked. When she insisted on paying restaurant staff to attend corporate culture sessions, they balked for a minute and then agreed. Results spoke. Deals closed. Misunderstandings decreased. A reputation for genuine engagement grew where a reputation for speed had been. Jasmine did not become a saint. She became a leader who remembered shifts, remembered how it feels to be spoken to like a function and not a person. She kept tipping large and unnoticed. She kept learning languages, not just words, but systems, compliance regimes, customs protocols, a little bit of tax law, so she could explain to a junior colleague why the company's travel policy wasn't stingy. It was legal. She visited the Prestige Club on a quiet night with a box of pastries for the staff and a sincere thank you for the manager who had backed her in public when it cost him something. She slipped an envelope into the staff tip pool, a grant she'd started in her new role, Respect Fund. It paid for textbooks, certification courses, a dental bill, a child's violin. At home, her mother's laugh returned in pieces, then in whole cloth. They watched old movies with subtitles, and Jasmine teased her about mispronouncing "sia sia." with too much enthusiasm. Her mother teased back, "I taught you your first language. I'm allowed to butcher a few of yours." They walked in the park. They went to a bakery where the owner taught them how to say custard in 3 dialects. Joy became less fragile. And yes, because stories like this demand a tally, Richard's numbers changed. He didn't lose everything. That's not how the world often works. He lost enough to learn. A loan came due without a friendly extension. A project stalled and then transferred to a rival firm. A young associate, left with a team and an ethic that made clients follow. He took a position that paid well, but did not pay with deference. He found himself in rooms where he was not the sun, merely a planet among many. He discovered, if he chose to see it, that there was a version of himself who could be deflated without being destroyed. Jasmine did not track his decline like a scoreboard. She tracked the people rising around her. Maya, now a floor captain training staff with the patience Jasmine had once shown her. A dishwasher named Federico studying nights to be a paramedic. Exam fees covered by the Respect Fund. A junior analyst in Jasmine's team who stuttered but found his best voice in written memos and was promoted when she insisted results matter more than charisma. Power moved outward instead of pooling. That was the point. The invitation arrived on heavy paper out of habit, but the event itself was light. A fundraiser at the Prestige Club for a literacy nonprofit, the kind of night that makes donors feel generous and the city feel small. Jasmine didn't plan to attend. She preferred impact over optics. But the nonprofit's director had a story of her own. Books saved her life, and she wanted to say thank you in every language she could. Jasmine said yes, because sometimes showing up is the lesson. She wore a dress that fit not like armor, but like ease. When she entered, the staff greeted her like family returning from a long trip. Maya hugged her in a corner that smelled like mint and starch. The manager shook her hand with both of his, the way some cultures greet a guest of honor. The older investor raised a glass from across the room. He did not make a speech about discovering her. He simply let their earlier decision continue bearing fruit. Midway through the evening, the MC, a teacher with a voice that could quiet a gymnasium, asked Jasmine to say a few words. She didn't bring notes. She didn't need them. She looked out at a room that had once watched to see if she would break and now watched because they trusted she'd build. "Thank you for investing in words," she said. "They're not tricks. They're bridges." She told a brief story about her mother reading labels like poetry when the strokes stole memories from longer shelves. "Language is how we serve each other," she said. "Sometimes that sounds like Mandarin in a fine dining room. Sometimes it sounds like a simple good evening that says, 'I see you.'" She ended with the line that had come to her in the moment months ago and had refused to leave. "Kindness lasts. So does disrespect. Choose what you want echoing your name." After applause that felt less like noise and more like consent, the MC called for a short break. That's when Richard approached. Not cinematic, no hush falling, no spotlight, but real. A man a little smaller than he had been, tie not quite so perfect, eyes that had learned something about edges. He waited until Jasmine acknowledged him. He did not extend his hand like a white flag to be noticed. He kept it at his side. "Ms. Williams," he said, voice without varnish. "I owe you an apology." He paused, as if making sure the word owed registered in himself first. "I tried to buy a spectacle with money and ego. You gave me a lesson I didn't deserve but needed. I'm sorry." He offered no excuse. He added no if or but or whether report of his own hardships. He stood there with the simple weight of it. Jasmine had prepared for this possibility, not the details, the posture. She nodded once. "Thank you," she said. Apology accepted. She didn't add a lecture or a sting. She didn't turn him into a prop for her magnanimity. She didn't offer friendship or demand penance. She did exactly what she wished someone had done for her 100 stress-fractured nights. She closed the loop cleanly. "I hope you have a good evening." He nodded back, relieved in a way that looked almost like gratitude. Then he stepped aside. The night ended with small kindnesses. A server sliding a to-go plate into a guest's hand with discreet care. A donor asking how to support the restaurant staff fund. 2 teenagers whispering "siesta" to Jasmine with bashful triumph. The story would keep traveling. How a black waitress spoke 9 languages and turned a bed into a bridge. How a millionaire learned that money is loud and character is louder. How a room full of strangers remembered that respect is not a currency you tip with, but a foundation you build on. Jasmine left through the service entrance, the way she'd always preferred, past the hum of dishwashers and the laughter of line cooks, out into a city that never stops testing and never stops offering chances to repair. She walked home under a sky that didn't care who had trended that morning. She texted her mother, heading back. "Save me a cookie." A reply came with 3 heart emojis and a voice note of a woman humming an old song. Jasmine smiled, pocketed her phone, and kept going. No spotlight, just streetlights, each one small and sufficient. Moral: respect everyone, especially when no one is watching. Kindness is not weakness. It is fluency in the one language the world always understands.